The letter arrived on a gray Thursday morning, its envelope thick and cream-colored, with a wax seal Eliza hadn't seen in years. She recognized the emblem immediately, the crest of the Wren family, delicately pressed into the wax. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid a knife beneath the flap. It wasn't every day a solicitor from Cumbria sent you a letter marked urgent. The letter was from the offices of Bellamy and Crouch, the firm that had handled her grandmother's affairs. It read plainly, her grandmother, Agatha Wren, had passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 93. In her will, she left Eliza the old family home in Ravenhill, a secluded village nestled among the Cumbrian hills. The letter concluded with an invitation to collect the keys and sign the final paperwork. There was something else. A note, handwritten, in the unmistakable script of her grandmother. Eliza, Ravenhill House is yours now. Be kind to it, and it will be kind to you. But promise me one thing. Never open the attic window. Eliza stared at the note for a long while. Her grandmother had always been a woman of peculiar habits, with an old soul and stories that sounded like they belonged in Gothic novels. Still, there had been warmth beneath that sternness. She hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since the family fell apart over a quarrel too painful to revisit. Despite the strangeness of it all, Eliza packed her bags and boarded a train north. London had become too loud, too fast. A few weeks in the countryside would do her good, she reasoned, especially in a house that came with no rent and endless stories hidden in the walls. Ravenhill was even smaller than she remembered. A handful of cottages clung to the edge of a wood, and the village pub doubled as a grocer. As the taxi pulled up the long winding drive to the house, mist began to roll across the hills. Then she saw it. Ravenhill House. Towering, ivy-covered, and worn by time. Mrs. Alden, the housekeeper, met her at the door. An older woman with silver hair pinned in a neat twist and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She handed Eliza the keys with a thin smile and said only one thing. Don't let the wind trick you. It howls different in Ravenhill. The inside of the house smelled like lavender and old stone. Dust clung to the corners like sleeping memories. Eliza wandered through the rooms slowly, trailing her fingers along wooden banisters and faded wallpaper. There was something enchanting about the place, something heavy and quiet, as though the house was waiting for her to listen. She stopped at the foot of the attic stairs. The narrow wooden steps led up to a door with a single brass knob. Above it, a round window, shut tight, draped with thick velvet curtains. The attic. Eliza didn't go up. Not yet. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the wind thread through the trees, she heard it. Faint, barely there. A melody. A lullaby. Played on what sounded like an old piano. And it was coming from above. Eliza woke before dawn, startled by the memory of that ghostly lullaby. The melody clung to her like a dream that hadn't finished. As she rose and wrapped herself in a thick wool cardigan, the house creaked around her, stretching its old bones in the morning cold. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of rosemary and old iron. She made tea the way her grandmother had taught her. Milk first, no sugar, and took it to the parlor where the morning mist still pressed against the windows like soft fingers. Ravenhill House had a way of holding its breath, as if the walls themselves were listening. She decided to explore more thoroughly that day, beginning with the study. Dust had settled thick on every surface, and the shelves sagged beneath the weight of books whose pages had curled with time. One particular book stood out. It was leather-bound, with no title on the spine. Inside were sketches, some architectural, others oddly personal. Drawings of the house, but not as it was. In these illustrations, the windows were shuttered with iron, the attic bricked over, and in every page, a small figure drawn in the shadows. A child. Always alone. Always looking out of the attic window. Eliza shut the book quickly. Her heart beat faster than it should have, and her hands felt suddenly cold. She told herself it was just imagination, the effect of the setting and the stories she used to hear from her grandmother about Ravenhill's history. Still, the image lingered. Later that afternoon, she met some of the villagers. They were polite, even warm, but guarded. The older ones looked at her with a kind of wary curiosity. Mrs. Gibbons from the shop offered her eggs and a tin of shortbread, then quietly said, "It's been a long time since someone lived in that house." A man named Hugh, probably in his 50s, leaned in and asked, "You've been up to the attic yet?" When she shook her head, he only nodded. "Best keep it that way, love." That evening, as twilight wrapped itself around the village, Eliza sat at the writing desk near the staircase and opened one of the smaller drawers. Inside, she found a single brass key and a letter, much older than the others. The envelope was addressed in faded ink. To whomever comes after me. Trust the silence. Beware the music. Eliza ran her fingers over the letter without opening it. Something in her stomach twisted. There was a chill in the room now, deeper than the wind could explain. Upstairs, just beneath the attic, the wallpaper had begun to peel away in one spot. She hadn't noticed it before. As she stepped closer, she saw something scratched into the plaster beneath. Not with ink. With fingernails. It read, "She sings when the moon is full." And that night, the moon rose bright and round over Ravenhill. And the lullaby returned. Stronger. Clearer. This time, Eliza could hear the words. The morning after the lullaby with lyrics chilled Eliza to the bone. She tried to dismiss it as a product of stress and fatigue, but deep down, something was shifting. Ravenhill was not merely an old house. It breathed with a history that was pressing ever closer. She took the brass key from her dressing table, feeling its cool weight in her palm. It didn't match any of the doors she had tried so far. One last possibility lingered in her mind. The attic. The stairs groaned as she climbed. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by her movements. She stood before the attic door, heart pounding. The key slid in as though it had been waiting. The lock clicked open. The air behind the door was stale, dry, but not untouched. A narrow flight of stairs led into darkness. She switched on her torch, its beam cutting through thick cobwebs, revealing fragments of forgotten furniture, an old trunk, and rows of small shoes. Children's shoes. Dozens of them. All carefully arranged along the edges of the attic floor. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She backed away, knocking into something that clattered, a porcelain doll, its face cracked, smiling with half a mouth. It stared at her from the floor. She turned and fled, nearly tripping on the steps as she descended. She didn't stop until she reached the kitchen. Her tea had gone cold. Her hands trembled as she lit the stove again. Later, she returned to the trunk. It had a faded name painted on the lid. Bryony Wren. Her grandmother. Inside were toys, letters, and a small notebook. Eliza flipped through it. Pages filled with Bryony's childish handwriting. Drawings, rhymes, and names of girls she once played with. But they weren't girls from the village. They were never real. Each name was crossed out. Next to them, in red ink, she sang too loud. She wouldn't stay quiet. She told about the stairs. The final entry read, "I don't want to play anymore." Eliza closed the book. That night, Eliza dreamt of children standing at the foot of her bed. Silent. Pale. Watching. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears she didn't remember crying. And on the floor beside her bed lay one of the attic shoes. It hadn't been there the night before. The day was gray and thick with mist, clinging to the windows of Ravenhill House. Eliza couldn't bring herself to enter the attic again. Instead, she spent the morning in the parlor, sifting through the old photograph albums she had found in the sideboard. Most of the images were worn and curling at the edges. Victorian portraits, gatherings in the garden, stone-faced ancestors posing stiffly. But one photo caught her attention. It was newer than the others. The picture showed a little girl standing in front of Ravenhill House. She wore a simple dress and buckled shoes, her hair in two neat plaits. Her face was turned away, slightly blurred as if she'd moved. Standing just behind her in the window was a figure. Faint. Nearly transparent. It looked like another child. Eliza flipped the photograph over. In faded pencil, someone had written, "Bryony, summer 1952. But the figure in the window didn't look like Bryony. That night, Eliza placed the photo beside her bed. She hoped it would help her piece things together. Maybe even reassure her. It didn't. At midnight, she awoke again. This time, it wasn't to music or whispers. It was silence. Utter, unnatural silence. Then, a thud. From downstairs. She grabbed her torch and crept into the hallway. The thud came again, followed by the sound of something dragging across wood. She followed it to the parlor. The door creaked open at her touch. Everything appeared normal, until she saw the photograph. It was no longer on her nightstand. It now sat on the mantelpiece, right beneath the mirror. And in the photo, the little girl had turned. Her face was visible now. Eliza stumbled back. The child's eyes were hollow. Her mouth twisted, not into a smile, but into a cry for help. Underneath the photo, scrawled in fresh ink, was a single word, remember. The next morning, Eliza barely touched her tea. The photograph still sat on the mantel, unmoved. She considered burning it, throwing it into the fireplace and ending the madness, but something held her back. The word remember echoed in her thoughts. She wandered into the hallway, tracing her fingers along the faded wallpaper. A faint humming noise stirred in the silence. Not music this time, but voices, whispers. At first, they were soft, unintelligible. But as she pressed her ear to the wall, she began to make out words. Under the stairs. The door must stay closed. Don't wake her. Eliza staggered back, her heart hammering in her chest. She rushed to the broom cupboard beneath the staircase. The door, swollen with time and damp, resisted at first. With a grunt, she forced it open. Dust and darkness. She knelt down, torch in hand, scanning the narrow space. Behind the cleaning supplies and a broken vacuum cleaner, she found something odd. A seam in the floorboards. Almost invisible. She pried at it with a screwdriver, and after a long creak, a hidden hatch popped free. It revealed a crawlspace. With trembling limbs, she squeezed through, her torch flickering as she moved. The space smelt of old stone and mildew. She reached the end and found a small iron gate, rusted shut. Behind it was a room. A child's room. Miniature furniture, a rocking horse, shelves filled with crumbling books and worn-out dolls. On the far wall, someone had drawn tally marks, hundreds of them, scratched deep into the plaster. Then she saw the writing. Bryony lives here. Eliza's breath caught. Her grandmother hadn't played in this room. She had lived in it. A scraping sound made her spin around. Something was moving in the dark behind her, slow and dragging. The whisper returned. This time, it was not through walls. It was right beside her ear. You shouldn't have come down here. Eliza scrambled backwards, her torch flailing as dust swirled in the narrow crawlspace. She couldn't see who or what had whispered to her. Her heart pounded, her hands scraped against stone and splinters. She fled the hidden chamber and slammed the small iron gate shut, but it didn't latch. Back in the main hallway, the air felt colder than before. Ravenhill House groaned around her, as if disturbed by her discovery. Later that evening, she sat with the diary again. She hadn't dared open it since the incident in the crawlspace. Now, with the fire flickering low, she returned to Bryony's final entries. They say I can come out soon. But they don't mean it. They never do. She watches me from the mirror. Her eyes are mine. But her smile isn't. Eliza stopped reading. The mirror. She glanced up at the large ornate one hanging in the parlor, the same one above the mantel, where the photograph now seemed to belong. Its surface shimmered slightly in the firelight. Suddenly, behind her reflection, she saw it, a figure. A little girl, standing just over her shoulder. Eliza turned quickly. No one. When she looked back, the girl in the mirror was still there. Only now, her mouth moved. Eliza could hear nothing, but she could feel the sound, like pressure in her skull, as if someone were whispering inside her head. She backed away, knocking over the armchair behind her. The photograph fell from the mantel. The glass cracked. Then the front door creaked open. By itself. The wind howled through the hall, and the mirror pulsed, glowing faintly. Eliza reached for the door to shut it, but it wouldn't close. Something was keeping it open. From the shadows beyond the threshold, small damp footprints began to appear on the floorboards, one by one, leading back into the house. And then, the piano began to play. The notes spilled from the piano in a slow, haunting lullaby. Eliza stood frozen in the hall, watching the keys move on their own. Each one pressed with deliberate weight, like the hand of a child who had played the tune many times before. It was the same melody she had heard that first night. The one her grandmother used to hum. She crept towards the parlor. The air was thick, almost syrupy, the temperature dropping with each step. Her breath came out in puffs. The mirror still shimmered faintly, its surface warped like water. As she passed, she didn't look at her reflection. She didn't want to see who else might be staring back. When she reached the piano, the music stopped. Silence. Then a whisper from the mirror. Finish it. Eliza's hand trembled as she reached for the final key of the song. She pressed it down. A single, lingering note hung in the air. The lights flickered. The floor shuddered. Then, from upstairs, came the sound of footsteps. Running. Eliza bolted into the hallway. Dust fell from the ceiling above. The footsteps circled in the room directly above her. The old nursery. She hadn't been inside it since her arrival. As she climbed the staircase, the air turned acrid. The door to the nursery creaked open by itself. Inside, everything was just as she remembered from her childhood visits. Except now, the toys were arranged in a perfect circle. In the center sat a cracked porcelain doll with one eye missing. The room grew colder still. Then the closet door flew open. Eliza jumped. Inside was a dress. Child-sized. Faded blue cotton with lace trim. It swung gently on its hanger, though there was no breeze. Pinned to it was a small yellowed note. You wore this the night it happened. Eliza backed away, heart racing. She didn't remember the dress. She didn't remember any of what the note suggested. But as she stared at the doll, its missing eye suddenly blinked. A voice came from behind her. You promised you wouldn't leave me. Eliza turned slowly. And there she was. The girl from the mirror. Her skin was pale as ash, her eyes hollow but filled with longing. Bryony. Only this time, she was not just a flicker of shadow or whisper in the walls. She was real. And she was remembering. Bryony stood still, her eyes locked on Eliza's. She looked no older than 8, her dress damp at the hem, her hair tangled in ribbons of cobweb. For a moment, neither of them moved. I waited, Bryony whispered. Eliza's throat tightened. I didn't know. I didn't remember. The walls around them seemed to close in. A slow creaking filled the nursery, as if the house itself were listening. Bryony stepped forward. They told me you'd come back. You said you would. Before the water. Before the fire. Eliza's head spun. Before the water. Before the fire. Something broke loose in her memory. Flashes of a storm, thunder, a scream. Running. A hand slipping from hers. She sank to the floor. I was only a child, she murmured. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought it was a game. Bryony knelt in front of her, touching Eliza's arm with fingers that felt as cold as stone. They blamed you. But I never did, she said softly. Tears streamed down Eliza's cheeks. What happened to you? Bryony's eyes flickered toward the wall. Behind there. He locked the door. Eliza turned to look. The wall next to the wardrobe was cracked, a faint outline of a hidden frame. She stood up, her hands brushing along the wood, until she found the latch. It opened with a dry click. A narrow passage led into a sealed room no bigger than a closet. Dust coated the floor. In the corner sat a small mattress, a stuffed rabbit, and the outline of where a child once lay. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth. She stepped back out into the nursery. Bryony was no longer there. But the air was lighter now. The silence. Softer. Later that night, Eliza returned to the parlor. The fire had burned low. The mirror reflected only her own face now. The photograph above the mantel no longer shimmered. She took it down gently, placing it beside the diary. She spoke aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. In the distance, the old grandfather clock chimed once. Behind her, the final piano note played on its own, one long, echoing sound. Then, stillness. Ravenhill House, for the first time, felt quiet.